I know a guy, one of the smartest people I've ever met, reads constantly, keeps up with everything from geopolitics to philosophy. The other day, he told me something that really stuck. He said, think about the hardware we're all carrying around. The human brain has more connections, more synapses than there are stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy. It's so efficient that, pound for pound, it generates about 8,000 times more energy than the sun. We have this miraculous supercomputer, this godlike hardware sitting between our ears. But then he just shook his head. And what software do we run on it, he asked. The same old program, an ancient, brutal game of empire and conquest, the same one we've been playing since the dawn of civilization. That contradiction is fascinating, isn't it? We possess this incredible cognitive machinery capable of understanding the universe, yet we seem trapped in a simple, destructive loop. It's as if we have the world's most advanced computer, and all we can think to do with it is play a game that's rigged to make us all lose in the end. That contradiction really struck me. This image of our incredible brain hardware capable of so much, running what feels like ancient, outdated software of conflict. It feels almost, well, absurd when you consider the possibilities. Today, we're taking a deep dive into this fascinating idea you've shared with us, that perhaps conflict isn't just an occasional bug in humanity's operating system, but actually part of its fundamental base code.
Exactly. And what's truly intriguing here is how that initial thought perfectly frames what we're about to explore. We're looking at what might be the very core operating system of large-scale human societies, this persistent game of empire and competition. It challenges a comforting notion we often hold. The idea that peace is the default state and conflict is the anomaly.
Right. Maybe it's the other way around.
Well, that's what we're digging into. We're asking if conflict is, in fact, deeply embedded in the very code of how we organize ourselves on a grand scale. It's a provocative idea, for sure, that our best hardware might be running very old, very persistent software.
So let's start with that incredible hardware we just mentioned. The human brain. I was just blown away by some of the sheer numbers around its capacity. Can you walk us through some of those truly mind-boggling facts about this organ sitting between our ears?
It's truly a marvel. When we talk about its sheer complexity, consider this. The human brain has an estimated 100 trillion synapses.
100 trillion.
Yeah. And to put that in perspective, that's far, far more connections than there are stars in our entire Milky Way galaxy, which scientists estimate to be somewhere between, say, 100 and 400 billion.
I can barely wrap my head around that number.
I know. Imagine that level of interconnected wiring, that vast web of communication, all packed into just about 3 pounds of tissue inside your skull. It's a design masterpiece, really.
Absolutely astounding. When you think about the amount of data and processing power that must represent, it just stretches the imagination.
And it's not just about the number of connections. It's also about its incredible efficiency. Now, while the sun's total energy output is astronomical, right?
Of course.
The human brain is a miracle of concentrated efficiency. It weighs only about 3 pounds, accounting for roughly 2% of our total body mass.
Tiny, relatively speaking.
Exactly. Yet it consumes a disproportionate amount of energy, around 20% of the body's total energy and oxygen intake at rest.
Wow, 20% just ticking over.
Right. And to really grasp its power, consider this. Pound for pound, when you compare the energy generated per cubic centimeter, a resting human brain produces about 8,000 times more energy than the sun's fusion core.
Wait, say that again? 8,000 times?
Pound for cubic centimeter.
Yeah.
It's not about raw, explosive power like the sun, but dense, concentrated, highly focused efficiency that allows for incredibly complex functions with minimal but optimized energy use.
So it's not a powerhouse in the sense of a supermassive star, but more like the most incredibly efficient, compact supercomputer imaginable. And the speed at which this miniature universe operates is equally incredible, right? I read something about that.
Absolutely. Information can travel between neurons at speeds of up to 268 miles per hour.
Faster than a bullet train.
Pretty much. And what's more, it's not a static system. Each brain has a unique connectivity pattern, almost like a fingerprint, distinct from anyone else's. And it's constantly changing and adapting in response to our experiences, a property known as neuroplasticity.
Ah, neuroplasticity. That's how we learn.
That's exactly how we learn, form new memories, and continuously modify old ones. It makes us capable of incredible adaptability, creativity, and growth throughout our lives.
So if we connect all of this to the bigger picture, this miraculous hardware should, theoretically, be capable of incredible feats of cooperation, empathy, understanding. You'd think with such a powerful, adaptable machine, we'd be naturally inclined towards building a more harmonious world.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
Which begs the question, If the hardware is so advanced, what is it about our software, our societal programming, that seems to keep us stuck in these destructive loops of conflict and competition? It's almost as if we're running a very basic, very old program on the most advanced machine ever built.
That's precisely the core of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
What we're exploring is this base code that seems to drive large-scale human interaction. And it's not purely biological, you know. It's described as an evolved, embodied, conscious technology.
Technology, how so?
Well, it involves a complex interplay of elements. Think about it. Our use of hand tools, our innate theory of mind, that ability to understand others' mental states and intentions.
Right, empathy and understanding others.
Exactly. And then the formation of human communities, the development of language, and ultimately the stories we use to coordinate action. These are just abstract concepts. They are deeply ingrained technologies that have profound, tangible effects on our habitat and on other communities around us.
Okay, I see. So they're like tools we evolved, tools for collective action.
Precisely. They are, in essence, the fundamental lines of code in our collective human software.
That's a powerful way to frame it. It's not just about the individual neurons firing. It's about how we choose to organize, communicate, and perceive our shared reality. The stories we tell ourselves, the myths we live by, they seem to program our collective actions in ways that can be both constructive and, unfortunately, very destructive.
You've hit on a crucial point there. And what's even more profound, perhaps, is the idea that social constructs are more than just the sum of their psychonarrative and environmental parts. They have a truly profound impact on living systems, the very systems we depend on for our survival.
Like the actual environment.
Yes. The concept emphasizes that it's living systems all the way down, meaning our social programming directly interfaces with and influences the biological and ecological foundations of our existence. Our ideas, our social structures, they don't just exist in our heads, they fundamentally reshape the world around us.
Wow. So it's not just metaphorical software, it's software that's literally shaping the planet and all life on it, consuming resources, impacting the environment. And if that's the case, then this game we're talking about, well, it sounds pretty terrifying in its implications.
It does. The evolved coded game is depicted as, get this, an omnicidal superorganism.
Omnicidal, like killing everything.
That's the idea. Think of it as a monstrous heat engine that emerges from civilized societies, consuming energy and materials at an increasing, insatiable rate over time. It's essentially designed to increase entropy on a grand scale, constantly drawing in more and more.
So it just consumes.
Consumes and grows. The idea here is that our modern civilization, this global, modern, techno-industrial, financialized, late-stage capitalist version, is a highly efficient accelerator of collapse and overshoot. It's as if the system itself is driving us towards an endpoint where it simply consumes everything in its path, irrespective of the long-term consequences.
Okay, so if conflict is indeed part of this fundamental base code, let's look at how this game plays out in the real world. We're talking about something historians call the Great Game, and it's far from ancient history, despite its 19th century origins.
Not at all. Still very relevant.
The original Great Game, as you might recall, was this intense geopolitical rivalry in the 19th century between the British and Russian empires. They were vying for influence across Central Asia, with Afghanistan often caught in the middle, serving as a key buffer zone. It was all very cloak and dagger, right? Espionage, diplomacy, proxy conflicts.
Absolutely. A shadowy dance for strategic advantage and control.
And when you consider this grand, impersonal game of geopolitics, it's so easy to lose sight of the actual human-level cost. We see charts about resource competition, rising blocks, BRICS, for instance, changing the dynamics. But what does that feel like on the ground? This made me try to imagine the perspective of someone at the very bottom of that global supply chain. Imagine a young man, let's call him Alikia, in the Katanga province of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's not thinking about the rivalry between Washington and Beijing or about BRICS summits. He's thinking about his little sister's school fees and the medicine his mother needs.
The day-to-day struggle.
Exactly. So he leaves his village, finds work in an artisanal cobalt mine. His world shrinks to the suffocating darkness of a narrow tunnel, digging with his bare hands for the bluish metal that powers our smartphones, our electric cars. Above ground, he sees the foreign supervisors, some European, some Chinese, in their clean pickup trucks. They don't speak to him, only to his crew boss. Alikia overhears their arguments in languages he doesn't understand, but he recognizes the universal tone of urgency, of demand.
The pressure.
Yeah. He watches as sacks of the mineral he risks his life for are loaded onto trucks. One convoy heads to a port controlled by a Western-backed company. Another is destined for a Chinese-funded railway. He knows these two groups are competing. For Alikia, this great game isn't a strategic map in some think tank. It's the dust in his lungs. It's the fact that the price of cobalt might drop 50 cents, meaning his sister goes hungry that week. He is a living, breathing pawn in a game whose rules he will never know, played for prizes he will never see.
That puts it in stark perspective.
Stories like Alikia's really ground the abstract headlines, don't they? When we talk about resource competition, we're talking about a global auction where the bids are placed in corporate boardrooms, and the price is paid by human bodies in places most of us will never visit. The rise of new economic powers doesn't just rebalance the world, it creates new pressures, new rivalries. These forces flow all the way down to the most vulnerable, turning their lives into collateral damage in the pursuit of progress. It's a powerful illustration of this game being played out globally.
It absolutely is. And what's critical to understand is that today, this region, Central Asia, encompassing Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan is once again a critical battleground. But as you said, it's not a simple two-player contest anymore. It's a truly multipolar competition for influence and resources, a far more complex version of the historical great game.
More players, more complexity.
Definitely. If we look at the players and their stakes, we see a complex web of overlapping interests. You've got the European Union, China, Turkey actively seeking to strengthen their presence. Meanwhile, the United States, Russia, Iran, India, Pakistan, they're all in the mix too, vying for influence.
All driven by resources and strategy.
A mix of both, absolutely.
Right.
Resource interests, strategic objectives. This competition isn't just theoretical. It impacts everything from trade routes to cultural exchange. It's shaping the very economic and political future of these nations.
It's interesting how Russia's influence, while still significant, seems to have shifted. I mean, Russian is still the lingua franca there, right? And Russian cinema has a presence.
It does. Russian language is widespread.
Yeah.
And millions of Central Asian migrants working in Russia maintain those cultural and economic ties. But
the invasion of Ukraine changed things.
it definitely challenged Moscow's dominance. You see Central Asian nations like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, even though they're members of the Russian-led CSTO, maintaining neutrality in the Ukraine conflict.
That signals a degree of independence, surely, like they're cautiously navigating a new landscape.
It does suggest that. And it highlights the evolving dynamics. For these Central Asian nations, the European Union now serves as a kind of counterweight they can use to balance their relations with Moscow. However, the EU faces really strong economic competition, primarily from China.
Ah, China's economic power.
Yes. Beijing is positioning itself as the major economic power in the region. The trade volume with Central Asian states is huge, around $94.8 billion. If current investment trends continue, China's presence and influence are expected to grow significantly, potentially at Russia's expense. They're leveraging economic means to become a primary Eurasian power.
So economic power is maybe the main tool in this new great game, more than military.
It often seems more potent in securing long-term influence, yes. It's a central component.
And meanwhile, the EU, as you mentioned, is eyeing critical minerals, trying to assert its influence, and Turkey, using cultural ties.
Yes. Turkey, mainly through the Organization of Turkic States, is also attempting to strengthen its role, leveraging historical and cultural ties, promoting shared heritage.
What about the U.S. in all this, lagging behind?
Generally, yes. American influence tends to lag, with perhaps the exception of Kazakhstan. Interestingly, the Trump administration's decision to impose tariffs, including that 27% tariff on Kazakhstan, is a point of concern for some there. However, the U.S. under Trump showed less desire to influence the region ideologically, focusing instead on pragmatic, non-ideological diplomacy.
Less values-based pressure.
Exactly. And paradoxically, that hands-off approach could make the U.S. a more desirable partner in the long term for some countries. They might see it as less intrusive, more focused on mutual benefit. While the U.S. has indicated gesture towards a more, let's say, isolationist stance from the Central Asia, South Asia region, it still seeks to advance its relevance through a smart power strategy, using both hard and soft power tools.
Okay, so this whole great game, all these competing interests, it's often fueled by something deeper, isn't it? This powerful internal narrative we call exceptionalism. It's like a built-in software feature convincing nations they're special, unique, maybe superior. Let's unpack this idea. How do we define exceptionalism in foreign policy?
Right. Exceptionalism in foreign policy discourse is essentially a society's debate about its own identity as a nation. It expresses this paradoxical relationship. The exceptional state claims particular and exclusive access to some universal good like peace or democracy or rights.
Things everyone wants, supposedly.
Exactly. But this access is derived from its unique civilizational heritage or political history. This often implies a deep conviction of moral superiority and a feeling that their way is impossible for others to replicate. It's different from nationalism, which is usually more about ethnic or cultural superiority within set borders. Exceptionalism refers to a universal morality, but one where they are the special guardians or examples.
That raises a really interesting question. Why do some countries adopt these narratives so strongly while others don't? What makes a state lean into this idea of being exceptional?
Well, the research points to a few common traits among these exceptionalist states. First, there's often an ambition to play a major role in international politics.
So big ambitions.
Yes, countries with this ambition are more likely to adopt exceptionalist discourses. And this can exist even without significant material power at the time. Think about early U.S. history or Nehru's India. Nehru explicitly justified his missionary foreign policy activism with India's destiny as a major power. So it's about aspiration, a sense of destiny, not just current might.
That's a really key distinction. It's less about what they are right now and more about what they believe they're destined to be.
Precisely. Second, many exceptionalist states see themselves as a civilization rather than just a nation state. They often reference a unique civilizational heritage.
Like China, India, Turkey.
Exactly, those are prominent examples. The U.S., by contrast, tends to ground its exceptionalism more in Enlightenment values. Freedom, democracy, rather than an ancient cultural heritage. It's a difference between a historical lineage and an ideological one.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third trait.
Finally, all four cases we're looking at, the U.S., China, India, and Turkey, seem to exhibit a certain self-centeredness. There's this term used in the sources, great state autism.
That's a provocative term.
It is. It describes how political leaders can become so preoccupied with domestic developments that they interpret international politics primarily through the lens of their own national history. This often leads to the universalization of the particular, where a country's unique experiences and values are seen as universally applicable or superior. It can make them ignore or downplay external realities that don't fit their internal narratives. It seems characteristic of relatively large countries, or maybe their internal focus can inadvertently blind them to external perspectives.
So what does this all mean for how these countries interact on the global stage? It really seems like this internal software, this exceptionalist narrative, can dictate their external behavior and how they see their role in the great game.
It absolutely does. Their internal programming dictates their external posture. Let's look at some cases. U.S. exceptionalism, for instance, goes way back. John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill in 1630, the Declaration of Independence.
The founding myths?
Right, emphasizing freedom, morality, and the betterment of humankind. It usually has two main strands, an exemplary one leading by example, peaceful diplomacy, and a missionary one actively helping others become like them, sometimes even bending or breaking international norms to fulfill this perceived duty.
So lead by example or actively convert others.
Basically, yeah. But both strands fundamentally believe American political values are universal. Now, G.W. Bush's policy definitely leaned towards that missionary, imperialist exceptionalism promoting democracy, the Iraq War, but earlier periods, or even Obama's emphasis on an indispensable role shared by others, moved towards more internationalist forms.
And Trump's America First.
That reflected more isolationist and exemptionalist elements, a willingness to disregard certain international norms if it served perceived national interests. The key insight here is understanding which type of exceptionalism a nation embraces helps us predict whether they're likely to intervene militarily, focus inward, or try to lead through diplomacy.
It's fascinating how the same core idea can manifest so differently. What about China? Its deep history must shape its exceptionalism.
Definitely. Chinese exceptionalism, too, has shown different characteristics over time, but the common denominator throughout history is often a belief in Chinese supremacy and goodness. Imperial China had concepts like Zhongwu, the Middle Kingdom, and Tianxia all under heaven, a sort of chosen by heaven narrative, often with a benevolent foreign policy through a tributary system.
A hierarchical view.
Often, yes. After the century of humiliation, China maintained a sense of entitlement to great power status, deriving moral authority from past unfair treatment. Mao's revolutionary Sinocentrism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, these continued the idea of distinctiveness. Contemporary Chinese exceptionalism emphasizes being a different great power from the West. offering a peaceful, harmonious alternative model, benevolent pacifism, harmonious inclusivism, a Confucian great power, following harmony with difference.
So, positioning themselves as non-Western, non-interfering.
Explicitly, yes. China distances itself from a missionary aim abroad, asserting it's not expansionist, acts in a status quo benevolent way.
And
However,
always a however.
well, some scholars observe that its policies in Xinjiang, Tibet, and towards Taiwan have an active missionary component, even if China doesn't classify them as foreign policy. Beijing actively promotes Confucian readings to defend its system in foreign policy, sometimes with that hierarchical view of barbaric versus civilized states. Or they claim historical expansions were due to soft power conversion, not violent conquest.
Which historians might contest.
Right. Historians studying China's imperial past, especially the Qing era, using the lens of colonialism, contest these soft power interpretations. They point to forceful, civilizing processes in some regions, though maybe not universally. So it's complex. China seems to show shifts and maybe even simultaneous presence of both imperialist and civilizational exceptionalism.
Okay, so even with the stated non-missionary goal, the historical interpretation and internal actions can look different to outsiders. Very nuanced. What about India? Post-independence especially.
Indian exceptionalism is often described as moral exceptionalism. It was really strong under Prime Minister Nehru after independence in 1947. It centered on India's unique capacity for moral leadership in world affairs. The anti-colonial struggle reinforced this belief in India's spiritual difference, its mission to project moral conduct.
A moral leader on the world stage.
That was the idea. Different strands of Indian nationalism, Gandhian, Nehruvian, Hindu, supported this missionary claim for moral leadership, especially India's perceived unique capacity to synthesize different and conflicting perspectives. The nonviolent victory contributed to a belief in the potency of ideas alone in foreign policy. Nehru pursued an activist foreign policy based on principles like being a model, avoiding force, respecting international law.
The non-aligned movement.
Exactly. He famously criticized Cold War power politics, advocated non-alignment, even refused a UN Security Council seat for China, arguing China deserved it more at the time. This aligns pretty well with globalist exceptionalism, missionary but non-exemptionalist, respecting international norms.
And today, under Modi.
Well, Prime Minister Modi continues to use ethical exceptionalism, claims the role of Vishwaguru, world teacher. But India's growing engagement with the U.S., like through naval exercises, suggests that maybe rising power status can sometimes limit these exceptionalist notions. Adhering strictly to orthodox non-alignment becomes harder. It shows how deeply a nation's history and philosophy shape its international self-perception.
And finally, Turkey. The Ottoman legacy, the bridge between East and West. How does that play out?
Turkish exceptionalism claims are based on that unique relationship between Islam and the state, from the Ottoman Empire through the Republic and the AKP government. Also its Ottoman past and its geography as a bridge between Europe and Asia.
Geographic exceptionalism.
Yeah, that and hybridity. It fueled Turkey's role as a mediator, a model for other Muslim and developing countries, often evoked as Neo-Ottomanism or a Pax Ottomana. Figures like former Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu equated Ottoman conquest with Ottoman globalization, saw the empire as a unique source of multiculturalism suited for a globalizing world. President Gül often called Turkey an inspiration for the Middle East.
So positioning themselves as a unique model again.
Right. Before 2016, Turkey's emphasis on inclusive multilateralism and mediation aligned it with internationalist exceptionalism. But after 2016 Davutoglu's dismissal, the attempted coup, things shifted. Turkish foreign policy became more transactional, more anti-Western in its discourse. Populist nationalism seems to have largely replaced those exceptionalist elements.
Another example of how internal politics can rewrite the software.
A compelling one, yes.
So these exceptionalist software programs, they don't just exist in a vacuum, do they? They're constantly reinforced, manipulated, spread through what we consume every day. Media narratives. It's a powerful engine for competition, and it has very real, very personal consequences. Media plays this huge role in shaping public opinion, social organization, mobilization. It creates the mental environment for these games. And I saw this fascinating kind of tragic thread online the other day. It wasn't about soldiers or diplomats, but about two engineers. It perfectly illustrates the power of these nationalistic narratives.
Oh, really? Tell me about it.
Okay, picture this. May, brilliant hardware engineer from Shanghai. David, talented software developer from California. They're working together at high-tech startup in a neutral city, say Berlin. For the first year, they're the perfect team, bonding over late-night coding, shared dream of creating something revolutionary, inside jokes, covering for each other, celebrating small wins, a single, cohesive unit.
Sounds ideal.
It was. But then the trade war escalates. David's news feed, curated by algorithms, fills up with stories of Chinese espionage, unfair trade, threats to security. May's feed, meanwhile, shows her American arrogance, a declining empire trying to suppress China's rise, unfair blockades, limiting development.
The echo chambers.
Totally. At first they try to ignore it, just political noise, but the narratives seep in. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. David starts wondering if May's suggestions are really her own, or if they serve some larger national agenda. May sees David's critiques not as professional feedback, but as reflecting his country's condescension, microaggressions mirroring the macroaggressions she reads about.
The trust starts to erode.
Completely. The breaking point comes over lunch, discussing a new microchip regulation. David calls it a necessary defense, echoing a headline he just read. May calls it a hostile blockade, using the exact words from a state media editorial she saw. They look at each other, and suddenly they don't see a colleague, a friend. They see a representative of a rival power. The trust, gone. The creative spark, extinguished. Killed by a war of narratives fought thousands of miles away.
Wow. That's, powerful.
And stories like that, or variations, are probably happening all the time. It shows the real-world impact of media bias, of these national narratives. These exceptionalist frameworks aren't just political tools, they're psychological weapons. They sever human connections. They encourage us to see the other not as an individual, but as a symbol of a threatening ideology. When media primes a population for suspicion, for hostility, it makes aggressive foreign policy not just possible, but popular. It makes enemies out of potential friends. It's like malware infecting our ability to collaborate.
And that raises the crucial question. How exactly do these narratives function to cement a particular worldview, especially in geopolitical competition? They're deliberately designed, aren't they?
Seems like it, to frame reality in a way that justifies national actions.
Exactly. Take Russian media narratives, for example. They consistently portray Russia as a rational, moderate geopolitical actor, standing in stark contrast to what they describe as the corruption and recklessness of the Euro-Atlantic world, mainly the US and EU.
So they're the sensible ones.
That's the framing. And it serves a clear purpose: legitimize Russia's actions globally, rally internal support.
Okay, so casting themselves as the rational counterpoint. And how does this show up in their policy objectives? What's the goal of the messaging?
Well, firstly, Russian policy explicitly aims to deflect the economic impact of Western isolation. The narratives support this by emphasizing resilience, self-sufficiency, often highlighting perceived weaknesses in Western economies. Secondly, Russia is deeply committed to developing alternatives to global political and economic institutions they see as USU-dominated.
Like BRICS.
Exactly. Fostering ties with China, Central Asian nations, strengthening the Eurasian Economic Union, promoting BRICS. They actively try to cast doubt on the credibility and integrity of Western-dominated institutions, portraying them as biased or outdated, thereby presenting themselves as leaders of a more equitable, multipolar world.
It's a very intentional shaping of the information environment then, not just informing, but actively framing perception to justify their game, build alternatives, discredit existing structures. And does this create a communication challenge for countries like the US?
Oh, absolutely. Russian propaganda is expansive. It tracks, comments on, refutes a huge range of issues, constantly tracking U.S. policy, NATO, exploiting dissension within U.S., EU, NATO ranks. This puts countries like the United States at a communication disadvantage. They're constantly playing defense against these pervasive, often deeply embedded narratives spreading through so many channels.
Okay, let's dive deeper now into this idea, this really core idea, that the game of empire and conflict isn't just a choice, maybe not even as a bad habit, but a fundamental feature, a base code of large-scale civilized societies. This is a tough one to grapple with, especially if you believe in progress towards peace. It challenges that whole linear view of history.
It really does cut against the grain of hoping for steady improvement.
You recounted the powerful story of Yusuf, an old antique shop owner in Kandahar, Afghanistan. His shop was basically a museum of failed empires. In one dusty glass case, a 19th century British regimental button found near a mountain pass next to it. A Soviet military watch, hands frozen. Beside that, a modern American MRE spoon.
Relics of the game.
Exactly. When a journalist asked him about the future, Yusuf just gave this tired smile. He talked about his own life. As a boy, saw the Soviets arrive promises of modernity, brotherhood. As a young man, saw them leave defeated. Then the Americans came promises of democracy, freedom. They left too. He told the journalist, every time they come with a new flag, but it is the same game.
Wow. Same game, new flag.
Yeah. They draw lines on maps in a foreign city. They give guns to one tribe, promises to another. They build a large base, say this time it is different. But the mountains do not change. The poppies still grow. And eventually they all go home. For Yusuf, history wasn't a line moving towards peace. It was a wheel, endlessly turning. The great powers saw Afghanistan as a board for their game. But for him and his people, it was just the weather, a storm that passes, another always gathering.
That's, yeah, a profoundly pessimistic but maybe realistic perspective from that vantage point.
It's a powerful, if bleak, illustration of that base code theory. It challenges our optimistic belief that we're steadily moving towards a more peaceful world. For people who've lived at the epicenter of geopolitical conflict for generations, sustainable global peace might seem like a complete fantasy. His story suggests that for Empire, conflict isn't the breakdown of the system, it is the system. And while that's hard to accept, facing it might be critical. Understanding this seemingly inherent drive might be the first step if we ever hope to rewrite that code.
It certainly raises profound questions. What does this base code imply about our societal structures, about the choices leaders make? If conflict is so foundational, how does it shape the core operations of civilization? Is there any way out?
Is warfighting really the core business model?
The theory suggests exactly that. Warfighting is presented as a keystone activity, a core component of the business model of conquest and control over energy and material resources. The prime directive of the great game is empire building. And where there's more than one empire or an empire and an aspiring empire, well, they clash. It's inevitable, according to this view.
Conflict not as deviation, but as function.
An integral, almost profitable function of how large-scale societies has historically operated. The engine of resource acquisition and power consolidation.
So it's like war is the ultimate mechanism for securing the resources that drive the system. And it sounds like the people at the top are almost programmed to run it that way, maybe even selected for it.
Indeed. The theory touches upon the nature of leadership, suggesting that certain types of leaders, those displaying traits like extreme narcissism, lack of empathy, Machiavellianism, sadism, sometimes called dark tetrad traits.
Not exactly desirable traits.
Hardly. But the theory suggests there are often less aberrations and more products or tools of this system, almost wired to perpetuate the game. These leaders are depicted as fundamentally incapable of understanding the difference between sustainable energy cycles in complex living systems and the insatiable energy-hungry demands of human-made machines. They're programmed to perpetuate the game, even if it leads to self-destruction.
That's a stark assessment. It paints a picture of us being on an accelerating treadmill towards a cliff edge. If this game is an omnicidal superorganism, what are the concrete mechanisms by which it consumes everything and accelerates collapse?
That's precisely the implication. The game fundamentally operates by increasing entropy. It does this by constantly consuming energy and materials at an increasing unsustainable rate. Think endless growth. More land, water, minerals, fossil fuels, human labor, all to fuel its expansion. This relentless consumption, driven by the competitive imperative of empire building, pushes us toward ecological and societal limits.
And modern civilization just speeds it up.
That's the argument. Our global, modern, techno-industrial, financialized, late-stage capitalist civilization is described as a highly efficient accelerator of collapse and overshoot because it has perfected the mechanisms of extraction and consumption. The logic of the game is to win. And winning, in this context, often means outcompeting others for finite resources, which inherently leads to overconsumption and degrading the very systems that sustain us.
Is there debate about whether this is truly inevitable, about human nature itself?
Well, yes. The discussion delves into that ongoing academic debate about the evolution of war. It brings up theoretical frameworks, addressing claims like whether ancestral warfare was frequent enough to select for psychological adaptations for fighting in humans.
So are we hardwired for war?
That's the question. Or do peaceful societies disprove that humans have adaptations for fighting? Does modern warfare make any such adaptations irrelevant anyway? These debates aren't conclusive, but they underscore the complexity. Is conflict inherent, or is it learned societal behavior? Is our hardware predisposed to this software?
And then there's the truly chilling endgame scenario hinted at, the dead hand. This sounds like the ultimate consequence of the game spinning out of control.
It does. The text touches upon the chilling idea of nuclear war on the dead hand, which refers to Russia's doomsday nuclear strike capabilities. It speculates on this as a potential great game ender.
The end of the game, literally.
And the profound psychological aspect here is the question of whether leaders, deeply entrenched in the logic of the game, perhaps suffering from that great state autism, are so deluded they believe they would survive such an event. The implication is, of course, that the ultimate consequences would be non-survivable for human civilization as we know it. A terrifying potential final act of this millennia-old game.
Okay, so if the game is inherent or at least deeply embedded, how does it evolve in our current interconnected world? It definitely seems the playing field is more crowded and complex than the old bipolar Cold War days. It's not just two superpowers anymore.
You're absolutely right. The current global landscape is definitely not a simple bipolar structure like the 20th century. It's characterized by technological dominance, deep economic interdependence, and intense influence competition. And this competition is happening across emerging regions: Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia. The rules of the game might be ancient, but the board is much bigger, far more dynamic, with way more players.
And paradoxically, the risks are higher now than during the Cold War.
That's what some analysis suggests, yes.
Sure.
Geopolitical risks today are considered to exceed Cold War levels. This isn't just a feeling. It's driven by concrete factors. Heightened military spending, highest since the Cold War.
Right, we see the headlines.
Stalled nuclear disarmament efforts, and a diminished role for multilateral institutions like the UN. The stability during the Cold War, while precarious, was also relatively predictable in its bipolar structure. Today, the sheer number of influential actors and complex interdependencies creates new levels of risk and unpredictability.
It's not just the US and China, Ben.
No, definitely not. Beyond the clear rise of China, many other regional powers are actively seeking to shape global dynamics. Think Brazil, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, South Africa, Indonesia.
The middle powers rising.
Exactly. This is truly a multipolar world, with influence diffusing across many centers of power.
And this proliferation of influence is measurable.
It is. The number of countries exerting significant influence, defined as influence in more than 5 other nations, has almost tripled, from 13 at the end of the Cold War to 34 in 2024. That reflects the overall rise of these middle powers. Plus, major global alliances are solidifying again. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran strengthening formal pacts, NATO allies increasing defense spending. It signals a world where blocs are reforming, hardening, adding another layer to the competition.
This leads us to a crucial question. How does this expanded competition play out on the ground? What are the consequences, especially for developing nations? It sounds like they often bear the brunt of this bigger, messier game.
They absolutely do. Economic interdependence, once seen as a stabilizing force, is now increasingly weaponized.
So?
Through trade wars, targeted sanctions on specific industries or financial institutions, and the deliberate decoupling of supply chains in critical industries like semiconductors. This economic friction is then exacerbated by intensifying proxy conflicts, hybrid warfare tactics, extensive disinformation campaigns, all designed to destabilize alliances and erode trust.
So the software creates digital and economic battlefields now, too.
Precisely. And the vulnerability of developing nations is a major concern. Countries in Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, they risk becoming deeply entangled in these power struggles. They face increased economic pressures, disrupted trade, reduced investment. For many, debt servicing costs now outweigh essential services, undermining development.
That's devastating.
It is. And this competition for influence among powerful nations can undermine local governance, divert precious attention and resources from critical challenges like climate change, food insecurity, peace building.
So powerful states are literally competing for influence in smaller countries through aid, trade, defense agreements, like an auction.
It can look like that. It's a very tangible struggle for loyalty and resources. And there are metrics like the Foreign Bilateral Influence Capacity, FBIC, that actually try to quantify a nation's ability to exert influence over another.
Let's look at China's expanding influence. How does that play out? West Africa, for instance.
Right. In West Africa, China has emerged as the dominant external actor, really with minimal competition. Driven primarily by economic interest, mining, agriculture, telecommunications. They surpassed U.S. influence there around 2011. It shows a very focused, effective economic approach, often long-term infrastructure projects.
Okay, and how does that compare to South Asia? Very different dynamic there.
Very different. South Asia sees significant competition among India, China, and the U.S. China's growing influence there is clear in massive initiatives like CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
Connecting China to the Arabian Sea?
Exactly, giving it vital trade access. It's part of the broader Belt and Road Initiative. Through these, China's financed ports, highways, energy infrastructure,
Yeah.
plus growing partnerships with Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And in response, both India and the U.S. have increased their investment and strategic interest in South Asia, trying to counter China's expanding footprint. It's a classic great game playing out in a multipolar context.
What about active conflicts, like Syria?
Syria is a stark example of how external competition impacts conflicts. Russian and Iranian support was instrumental in the Assad regime surviving for so long before its collapse in late 2024. As of early 2024, Russia and Turkey had solidified their positions as most influential states there. But shifts in external support, driven by other conflicts like Ukraine or Israel-Hezbollah, can destabilize existing control. We saw that when reluctance from Russia and Iran to increase support coincided with rebel offensives that eroded regime control. It highlights how internal conflict dynamics are profoundly shaped by external power plays.
It's clear that while the U.S. and China are globally dominant in influence, they have different zones, right? U.S. strong in Latin America, China in sub-Saharan Africa.
That's generally true. The U.S. has significant influence in 74 low- and middle-income countries, China in 65. But China influences 27 states in sub-Saharan Africa compared to the U.S.'s 9. The U.S. dominates Latin America, 32 states to China's 7. It suggests that while they are global players, their power projection still has limits and tends to concentrate regionally.
So not total global domination by either.
Not really. Overall gains in one region are often offset by losses elsewhere. It reflects the absolute limits on any single power-projecting influence everywhere simultaneously. And most major economies tend to concentrate their influence regionally, which suggests many states might be less dependent on a single powerful ally than we sometimes think. It adds to the complexity. It's a web of connections, not a simple tug of war.
It's quite a picture, isn't it? This deep dive into the base code of empire, exceptionalism, the relentless great game, it shows us a world far more complex than the simple headlines suggest. It's a world where our incredible human capacity for understanding is constantly pitted against these ancient patterns of competition, patterns that seem to be accelerating with every new technological advancement.
Indeed. We've seen how these dynamics play out in geopolitics, how they shape the stories we tell ourselves, and even how they impact individual lives, like Alikia struggling at the bottom of the supply chain, or the shattered collaboration between May and David, whose trust was eroded by those nationalistic media narratives. The forces at play are profound, rooted deep in history, in human behavior, and they continue to accelerate in new, interconnected ways.
It's a compelling, if somewhat sobering, look at the ongoing story of human civilization.
It is. Ultimately, this deep dive suggests that the software of conflict isn't just outdated, it's a self-replicating program that seems almost designed to consume everything in its path. The real question for us as humans equipped with this incredible hardware isn't just how to survive the game, but whether we can fundamentally rewrite its rules before it consumes us all.